When my son was very young, 3 years old or so, I saw him one day staring at a pitcher of apple juice on the kitchen table. After a while, he began to pass his hand behind the pitcher. And then he exclaimed, "The apple juice makes believe my hand is orange." And at that moment, he had joined the ranks of the philosophers because he was able to distinguish between appearance and reality, which is a characteristic of all human beings, some of whom use it and some of whom don't. And this class is designed to enlighten the process of distinguishing appearance and reality and relating them to each other. And for that reason, I'm beginning the class with Plato's allegory of the cave, which you can find on the internet. And it is probably the most famous illustration of the distinction between the discovery of truth out of a reflection of error, or the discovery of reality out of an interpretation of the nature of appearance and falsehood. Now, there are two ways to go about this. One way is to say what the various forms of philosophy are, and then to say what they all have in common. Well, the basic forms of philosophy, in the case of Plato, for example, were metaphysics, which is an inquiry into the nature of reality; epistemology, which is an inquiry into the nature of knowledge, how we know, and what knowledge consists in; ethics, which you can all easily understand, questions of good and bad, right and wrong, obligation and responsibility; social and political philosophy, which are questions such as what makes a good society and what is the nature of a society. Is it, as Margaret Thatcher intoned on one occasion, there is no such thing as society, there are only individuals? Is that true or false? Well, hopefully we'll get to that. We'll read John Stuart Mill, and we'll read Marx, and we'll let them we'll let them struggle it out for themselves. And then we come to the philosophy of religion, and finally we come to aesthetics, the nature of art and the question of what is beauty. Now, that's a wide array. What do they all have in common? They all have in common an inquiry into the fundamental presuppositions of human thought, such as my son sitting at the table and saying that the apple juice made believe that his hand was orange. He needed some way to distinguish between the fact that his hand looked orange on one occasion, but didn't look orange on the next occasion. Behind the pitcher, it was orange, it appeared orange, he would say later, but when removed from behind the pitcher, it was its normal color. How do we make a world in which these different experiences do not contradict each other and leave us in a completely irrational, incomprehensible state of mind? How do we look down the railroad tracks, for example, and see them converge? When we walk to the point at which they converge, they don't converge. They're just as parallel as the railroad tracks were from the point that we began. We make a distinction between appearance and reality. We say the tracks appeared to come together, but in fact they actually did not. And then we have to explain. Now you might say, well, the laws of optics can take care of that. We can rely on science. But we only introduce science when we've already established that there's a puzzle to be solved. And the puzzle to be solved in this case is how to reconcile parallel lines with convergent lines. What do all these features have in common? Philosophy is a study in self-reflection. and it's a study in the basic assumptions that all of us make use of in order to understand the world. The nature of philosophy is an attempt to free oneself from the various interpretations and assumptions that are ordinarily imposed upon us. It's a matter, in a sense, of clearing our own minds of debris and coming to the ultimate point at which we understand, through our own understanding, of what the world is, what the world requires of us, what the nature of beauty is, and those are questions that all of us accept from the society around us, but in philosophy we try to free ourselves of those assumptions and come to our own conclusions as to what the world is and what the world ought to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.